A project by Chicago's mayor to review city monuments for possible removal is facing a challenge from one of the local aldermen. Brendan Reilly has introduced an ordinance that would give the city council the final say on whether statues are taken down. That power is currently held by a special commissioner and is based on feedback from Mayor Lori Lightfoot and her Monument Advisory Committee. That committee was created to advise the Chicago Monuments Project. It was formed following nationwide protests over racial injustice last summer. So far, 41 historical monuments have been flagged for further review. The list includes statues of Presidents George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, and the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. The mayor's office referred CBSN to the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs in response to Alderman Reilly's proposal. In a statement, the department said, quote, "This is not simply a binary choice between keeping or removing any particular statue on whoever's authority. The Chicago Monuments Project is an opportunity to brainstorm ways to add context, to add voices, and to create new work together." And the alderman of downtown Chicago's 42nd Ward, Brendan Reilly, joins me now. Alderman Reilly, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So what's your position on the city's Monuments Project? Do you support it or do you oppose it, and why?
I think it's fine to have the project in place and the advisory council. Many of the folks that are on that council are well-respected community leaders, leaders in the arts community, cultural institutions. And having that initial review, I think, is great. My concern is that the city of Chicago is run by two co-equal branches of government, the Chicago City Council and the mayor. And my concern, and I think others are also concerned, that this committee could provide input to the mayor's appointed commissioner of cultural affairs for that person to decide unilaterally whether or not to remove or alter monuments and statues in public spaces. And so in the interest of transparency and also out of respect for the legislative branch of government in Chicago, I introduced an ordinance to ensure that there is great public dialogue and transparency around any decisions that we make about these monuments and sculptures, and that ultimately the city council should have to sign off on any changes that are made.
So I want to follow up on a couple points you just made in just a moment, but Mayor Lightfoot did authorize the temporary removal of two Christopher Columbus statues last summer. The move was said to be temporary. What reasons were given, and were those statues replaced?
Sure. And the mayor at that time exercised her broad authorities that the city council granted her to have special emergency powers during COVID. At the time, the city was experiencing tremendous civil unrest. We were having daily massive protests through Grant Park, up and down Michigan Avenue, along the lakefront for months of last year. And the Christopher Columbus statue became a focal point for a number of the protests. And in fact, the protests that prompted the mayor to temporarily remove the statue got violent. And a number of police officers were injured simply guarding this monument. And so I think the mayor at the time made the correct decision to remove the lightning rod from Grant Park temporarily until we could restore peace and law and order. But that, again, is to be a temporary decision. And I suspect that'll be resolved by the recommendations of this committee and hopefully with a review from the city council.
Well, you have raised concerns over what some see as a lack of transparency by Mayor Lightfoot's advisory board early on in selecting these monuments for review, but the advisory committee did recently conduct a public engagement process. How would your proposal bring more people into the conversation?
And I'm glad to see that the ordinance has prompted that move. By nature, the legislative process at City Hall invites lots of transparency. Before a city council committee votes on any action, we invite lots of public comment, and that is broadcast across the city. People can also attend in person when we're not in COVID, but we gather lots and lots of feedback that way. Aldermen can also, we all send out weekly newsletters to our constituents via email. We can be soliciting opinions from them that way as well. But I think the Better Government Association here in Chicago was correct to say that this needs to be a very broad public discussion with absolute transparency. These decisions should not be made in a room by a couple of dozen appointed people who are only accountable to the mayor's administration. So I think by having the city council preside over these decisions in conjunction with the mayor, that's the best way, the most democratic way with a small d, to have this conversation to determine whether certain monuments should be altered or others removed entirely.
I'm curious, Alderman, what if residents there in the 42nd Ward actually told you about who should have the final say over monuments?
I'm sorry?
What is it that residents there in the 42nd Ward where you are have told you? What have they said about who they think should have that final say over monuments?
You know, I haven't run into anybody who has resisted the idea of the city council presiding over that decision making. I think most people recognize that the alderman is the elected official closest to the ground, closest to his or her constituents. And we are held accountable for our actions on a more granular level than a mayor would be. Everyone, I think, that I've spoken to looks forward to the idea of having a transparent discussion about this. I'll be honest, in the grand pecking order of issues that I'm tackling right now, monuments and statues are not near the top of that list. We're trying to manage a pandemic, revitalize our economy, keep our city safe. Those are the things I'm focused on. But when the mayor decided to appoint this panel to make these very big decisions, I thought it was important for me to step up and remind folks the legislative branch of government in Chicago is a co-equal partner, and we should help make those decisions together.
Is that the bottom line as we wrap up here in our final minutes, Alderman, that this really is not just about monuments, but over what you say is this necessary asserting of this co-equal branch of government, that you have the legislative branch and the executive branch? Do you feel that somehow the mayor is denying that co-equal status of the legislative branch?
No, I don't think so. And I think that the mayor's intentions are good here. I'm simply making an additional recommendation that the legislative branch be just as involved in those decisions as the mayor's administration is. But yes, this is as much about process and transparency around decisions on these monuments as it is about reinforcing the fact that we have a two-branch government in Chicago, and we should work together in partnership to make decisions, not just on budgets and policy, but also decisions about what monuments and sculptures are in our public spaces.
Chicago Alderman Brendan Reilly. Alderman, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.